She spent 7 years dressing the most powerful women in Seoul, and not one of them knew her name. Every stitch, every drape, every gown that made editors gasp and cameras flash, all of it hers, none of it credited to her. She was the ghost behind the label, the hands nobody thanked, the talent nobody saw. Until the night she walked into the wrong party, in the wrong clothes, surrounded by the wrong people. And the most dangerous man in Seoul looked straight at her like she was the only real thing in the room. This is her story. If this is your kind of story, hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The gown arrived at Kang Jun-seo's private estate on a Tuesday morning, packed in a black garment bag with no logo on the outside and no name on the inside tag, which was exactly the problem. Amara Brooks noticed the missing tag the moment the courier handed the bag back to her outside the delivery entrance. She'd sewn that tag herself the night before. White satin ribbon, hand-stitched in silver thread. Maison Véronique, Seoul. She'd pressed it into the lining at 1:47 in the morning while Véronique Choi stood behind her drinking wine and talking about the editorial spread she was planning to pitch to Vogue Korea. Now the tag was gone. Amara stood in the cold morning air with the garment bag in both hands and stared at the seam where the tag should have been. She didn't say anything. She just breathed through her nose, slow and controlled, the way she'd taught herself to breathe in situations where screaming wasn't an option. Behind her, the driver of the company van was already pulling away from the curb. She hadn't been told to wait for a ride back. That wasn't unusual. She re-zipped the bag, smoothed the front of her coat, and pressed the buzzer beside the service entrance for the second time. The estate was set back from the road behind a wall of pale granite that ran the length of an entire city block in Seongbuk-dong. Old money neighborhood. Old trees. The kind of quiet that didn't exist naturally in Seoul. It was purchased and maintained like everything else in places like this. She could see the upper floors of the main house over the top of the wall. Stone and glass and clean architectural lines that said someone with taste had spent serious money making sure it didn't look like they were trying. The buzzer crackled. A woman's voice, cool and professional. Yes? Amara Brooks. I'm here with the Maison Véronique delivery, the fitting appointment for Madame Kang. A pause. Then, you're early. Yes, I apologize. I wanted to allow time in case any last-minute adjustments were needed. Another pause, longer. Then the gate clicked and swung inward. The path to the service entrance cut around the side of the main house through a garden that was mostly bare in November, the trees stripped down to their bones. Amara walked it quickly, the garment bag over one arm, her kit bag on her shoulder. She was wearing her work clothes, slim black trousers, a fitted gray blazer, low heels that she could actually stand in for 6 hours. Her hair was pulled back. She wore no jewelry except the small gold studs in her ears that her mother had sent from Chicago 3 Christmases ago in a padded envelope, along with a card that said, "You were always meant for big things, baby." Amara kept the card in her kit bag. She didn't know why. It wasn't a good luck charm. It was more like evidence. Of what, she hadn't decided yet. A young woman in a dark uniform met her at the service door and led her through a back corridor into a room that had clearly been set up as a temporary fitting space. Full-length mirror, a portable dress form already adjusted to Madame Kang's measurements, good lighting overhead. Someone had thought about this. Someone had done it right. Amara unzipped the garment bag and lifted the gown free. Even she stopped for a second. She'd been living inside this dress for 11 weeks. She'd drawn the initial sketch on a cocktail napkin in a cafe in Hongdae at 9 in the morning after a night of barely 3 hours of sleep. She'd sourced the fabric herself, a silk organza from a small supplier in Busan that Véronique didn't know existed because Amara had never told her. She'd hand-beaded the upper bodice over the course of 4 separate nights while Véronique was at industry events. She'd rebuilt the back structure twice because the first version didn't move the way she wanted it to move. The dress was the color of deep water just before dark. Navy bleeding into violet, bleeding into the faintest trace of silver at the hem where the light caught the beads. It was formal without being stiff. It had weight, but it breathed. When you put it on, Amara knew, because she'd draped it over a dress form and walked around it for an hour in the studio at 2 in the morning, it made you look like a woman who didn't need anyone's approval. She'd designed it thinking about her own mother, actually. Not that she'd ever say that out loud. She was arranging the gown on the dress form when the door opened. Madame Kang Hye-rin was 71 years old and moved like a woman who had decided decades ago that hurrying was beneath her. She was small, maybe 5'2", with silver hair cut close to her head and a posture so correct it looked deliberate. She was wearing a silk robe over her clothes and reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and she stopped in the doorway and looked at the gown for a long moment before she said anything. "Oh," she said quietly. That was all. Just that. But the way she said it made the young woman in the uniform take a small step backward. Madame Kang walked forward and stood in front of the dress form. She reached out and touched the beadwork at the shoulder, not grabbing, just grazing the surface with her fingertips the way you touch something you're not sure is real. Who made this? Amara opened her mouth, closed it. The answer she was supposed to give was already lined up and ready. Maison Veronique, Madame Kang. Miss Choi's studio has been working on this piece for the past 3 months, because that was the answer she always gave, the answer that kept her employed, the answer that kept her visa paperwork clean and her studio access intact, and the small wire transfers coming into her Korean bank account on the 1st of every month. Maison Veronique, Amara said. Miss Choi's atelier. I'm the head fitter. I'm here to make sure everything sits correctly for you. Madame Kang looked at her. Not the look of someone who was checking a fact. The look of someone who already knew the answer and was waiting to see which version you choose to give her. Head fitter, the old woman repeated. Yes, madam. Madame Kang studied her for another moment, then nodded once and set down her reading glasses on the side table. Let's see how it fits. The fitting took 45 minutes. Amara worked without talking much, which was her habit. She circled the old woman slowly, pinning what needed pinning, releasing what needed releasing. The waist needed a centimeter let out. She'd anticipated that, had left the seam allowance for exactly this reason. The hem was right. The back closure sat exactly where it should. The beading at the shoulder caught the light from the window and sent small fragments of it across the walls. Madame Kang was quiet during most of the process. She watched Amara in the mirror without appearing to watch her. The young staff member stood near the door and looked at her phone. You're American, Madame Kang said at one point. Not a question. Yes, from Chicago originally. How long have you been in Seoul? 7 years. The old woman made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. Do you like it here? Amara was on her knees adjusting the hem at the back. She thought about the question for a second longer than was probably appropriate. I like the work, she said. That's not what I asked. Amara sat back on her heels and looked up at the mirror. Madame Kang was watching her reflection. Some days I love it, Amara said. Some days I feel like a guest who's been here so long everyone forgot to ask if I actually wanted to stay. She didn't know why she said that. She hadn't planned to say anything close to that. Came out flat and honest, and she immediately wanted to put it back. But Madame Kang just nodded, like she'd filed the information away somewhere useful. The dress, the old woman said. Tell me about it. I'm sorry? The design. Tell me what you were thinking when you made it. Amara stood up slowly. She rolled her shoulders once, a private habit, a way of resetting. It's meant to move like water, she said carefully. The structure is rigid enough to hold its shape, but the outer layer is free. So when you walk, it follows you without dragging. The beadwork is heavier at the shoulder because I wanted the eye to go up, toward the face. She paused, toward the person wearing it, not the dress. Madame Kang was quiet. I wanted it to feel like a statement, Amara continued, quieter now, not a performance. The old woman looked at her in the mirror for a long time. Miss Choi is very talented, she said finally. Yes, Amara said. She is. Neither of them said anything else. She was packing up her kit bag in the corridor outside the fitting room when she heard the footsteps, not the soft, quick steps of household staff. Something heavier, slower, deliberate the way footsteps get when the person making them is used to having space cleared in front of them. Amara was crouching over her bag and didn't look up immediately, which meant that the first thing she registered about Kang Jun-seo was his shoes, black, handmade, the kind of shoes that cost more than her monthly rent and had been polished that morning by someone whose job it was to do exactly that. She looked up. He was taller than she'd expected. She'd heard his name before. Everyone in certain circles in Seoul had heard his name, the way you heard about weather before it arrived. But she hadn't formed a clear picture. The picture she had now was mid-30s, broad through the shoulders, a face that was structured and still and gave away nothing. Dark suit, no tie. He had the look of a man who had recently made a decision he didn't particularly enjoy and was now simply carrying it. He was looking at her like she was something he hadn't expected to find in his own hallway. "You're from the atelier," he said. Not a question. His English was clean and direct, the kind that comes from education rather than exposure. Amara stood up. "Yes. I'm the head fitter for Maison Veronique. I was here for your mother's fitting." He looked past her at the closed door of the fitting room, then back at her. "The gown. It's finished. The final adjustments. Did you make it?" The question came out flat and simple and landed in the corridor like something dropped from a height. Amara felt the back of her neck go warm. "I'm sorry?" "The gown." He wasn't impatient. He was just precise. "Did you design it?" She had a script for this. She had given this speech or versions of it probably 80 times over 7 years. "I'm part of a talented team. Ms. Choi leads the creative vision. My role is execution and fitting." She could say it in Korean or English, could deliver it with a smile that looked genuine because she had practiced that smile until the muscles around her mouth knew the shape without being asked. She looked at him. He was watching her with the particular attention of someone who was used to people lying to him and had gotten very good at knowing when they were about to do it. "I work for Ms. Choi," Amara said. He let a moment pass. "That's not what I asked." She picked up her kit bag and settled the strap on her shoulder. "I should be getting back. Thank you for having me." The beadwork on the shoulder. He said it like he was reading from notes. "The pattern is weighted heavier on the left side than the right. Most designers do it symmetrically. This isn't symmetrical, and it's not accidental. Someone made a choice." He paused. "Ms. Choi's recent work is symmetrical. I've seen her last 3 collections." Amara stared at him. "I pay attention to things," he said simply. The corridor was very quiet. She could hear her own breathing. She was aware of exactly how still he was standing and exactly how still she was standing, and the fact that there was maybe 4 feet of polished floor between them. "I need to be getting back," she said. He stepped slightly to the side, not blocking her, just shifting his weight, and she walked past him toward the service exit. She did not look back. She was very careful not to look back. She was in the garden, on the stone path, before she let herself exhale. The company van wasn't waiting. She'd known it wouldn't be. She stood at the service gate for a moment and then pulled out her phone and called for a cab and stood in the thin November cold with her kit bag on her shoulder and the garment bag folded over her arm. Empty now, the gown left behind on its form, and tried to slow down whatever was happening inside her chest. He knew. That was the thought she couldn't get past. He knew, or he suspected strongly enough that the difference didn't matter. And he'd asked her directly, which meant he was either testing her or he was the kind of man who didn't see a reason to approach things sideways. Based on what she knew about Kang Jun-seo, which was what everyone in Seoul's fashion-adjacent social world knew, which was that his family's legitimate business interests were substantial, and his illegitimate ones were more substantial still. He was probably both. The cab arrived. She got in. The driver asked where she was going, and she gave him the address of the studio in Mapo-gu without thinking about it, out of habit, because that was where she went at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. She sat in the back and watched Seoul slide past the window. They passed through Seongbuk and dropped down toward the river, and the city thickened around her. The neon signs and the construction cranes and the delivery scooters and the office buildings with their banks of lit windows. And she felt the specific loneliness of someone who has been somewhere long enough to know the streets, but not long enough to be known by them. 7 years. She'd come here because she'd gotten a job offer from a Korean fashion group right out of school, a 2-year contract that had become a longer-term position at another house, and then another until she'd landed at Maison Veronique 3 years ago and found the thing she hadn't known she was looking for, which was Veronique Choi's creative infrastructure and Veronique Choi's client list and Veronique Choi's name on the door. The work was real. That had always been real. Amara had grown up watching her mother alter dresses in the back room of a dry cleaner in Pilsen and had understood fabric before she could name what she understood about it. She'd gotten a partial scholarship to a design school in New York and had worked 3 jobs to cover the rest, and had graduated with a portfolio that her professors called technically exceptional and her classmates called quietly, a little resentfully, unfair. She had never been short of talent. She had been consistently short of credit. The cab stopped at a red light and she looked at her phone. No messages from Veronique. The fitting had gone fine. The gown was done, the client had been pleased, the job was complete. There was nothing Veronique needed from her that she hadn't already provided. There was never anything Veronique needed from her that she hadn't already provided. Amara put her phone face down on her knee and looked out the window. The studio occupied the top 2 floors of a narrow building in Mapogu that Veronique had converted 8 years ago, before the neighborhood got expensive. It smelled like fabric and coffee and the faint chemical sharpness of the dry cleaning solvent they used for delicate pieces. There were 3 workrooms and a small client salon at the front, and a private office that Veronique rarely used because she preferred to work from her apartment in Gangnam. Amara had a workstation in the largest room, second from the door, next to the window that looked out over the street. She'd hung 3 of her own sketches above the station, not credited, just framed, technically decorative, because she needed to see them while she worked. None of the other staff had ever asked whose drawings they were. Veronique had glanced at them once and said they had good energy. She dropped her bags and sat down and looked at the current project on her work table. A gown for the wife of a technology executive, pale gold silk, intricate seaming at the bodice. She'd started the pattern 2 weeks ago. The design was hers. It was always hers. Minji, the junior cutter, appeared in the doorway. She was 24 and deeply shy, and had the best eye for proportion Amara had seen in someone that young. "How was the Kang fitting?" "Fine. Went smoothly." "Madame Kang is scary," Minji said conversationally. "She's not scary. She just doesn't perform warmth. She doesn't feel." Minji considered this. "What's the difference?" "One of those is a character flaw. The other one isn't." Minji nodded like she was logging the information for later and disappeared back to her station. Amara looked at the gold silk on her work table. She picked up her scissors. She set them down again. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it. She picked it up. The text was short. "This is Kang Jun-seo. My mother's birthday celebration is Saturday evening at the family estate. She would like you to attend. Dress code is formal. A car will be arranged. Please confirm by Thursday." Amara read it twice. Then she set the phone down on the work table very carefully, the way you set down something that might break. She sat there for a long moment with the gold silk in front of her and the sketches on the wall above her and the sounds of the studio around her, the hiss of the iron press in the next room, the low voices of the other staff, the distant traffic from the street below. Her phone buzzed again. Same number. She insisted. "I'm passing on the message." Amara almost smiled. Almost. She picked up her scissors, found her mark on the silk, and began to cut. She didn't tell Veronique about the invitation. She wasn't sure why she made that choice. It wasn't strategy, exactly. It wasn't fear. It was something quieter. A small, stubborn decision to keep one thing to herself for a change. The fitting had been hers. The dress had been hers. The moment in that corridor had been hers. She could let the rest of it go, the way she always let the rest of it go, but she was going to keep Saturday. She responded Thursday morning, confirmed, "Thank you." She spent Thursday afternoon trying to figure out what to wear. This was genuinely complicated because Amara's wardrobe for formal Seoul occasions was limited in a specific way. She could make things, obviously, and she owned several pieces that she'd constructed for herself over the years, but formal events at the kind of addresses Madame Kang lived at required a particular register. Not just elegant, old money elegant, the kind of dressing that looked effortless because it was so deeply considered. She was 3 hours into the problem when her phone rang. A number she did recognize, Kang Seo-yeon. She'd met Seo-yeon twice, both times at industry events where Veronique had brought her as staff adjacent. Seo-yeon was Jun-seo's cousin, a fact she deployed in conversation frequently, and she moved through Seoul's fashion and society circles with the specific energy of someone who had decided early that being adjacent to power was the next best thing to having it. She was not particularly warm, but she wasn't openly hostile either. She was the kind of person who kept you at exactly the distance most useful to her. Amara picked up. "Hello?" "Amara." Seo-yeon's voice was smooth, a little too smooth. "I heard you're coming to Aunt Hye-rin's dinner Saturday." "Yes." Madame Kang was kind enough to invite me. Of course she was. She loved the gown. A small, gliding pause. "I'm calling because I want to make sure you're not stressed about the evening. These Kang family dinners, they look intimidating from the outside, but they're really very casual, family-focused, intimate. Nothing like what you might be imagining. Amara listened. Honestly, it's just immediate family and a few close friends. Very low-key. Aunt Hyerin prefers it that way for her personal celebrations. You'd be completely overdressed in anything formal, something comfortable. Smart casual, really. Jeans are totally fine. She genuinely hates when people make it into a production. Amara was quiet for a moment. Smart casual, she repeated. Exactly. You'll feel much more comfortable that way. Trust me, showing up in a gown when everyone else is in jeans would be so awkward. I'm telling you this as someone who knows the family. Another pause. I just didn't want you to feel embarrassed. The word embarrassed sat in the air between them for a second. Thank you, Amara said. I appreciate you calling. Of course. That's what we do, right? We look out for each other. The call ended. Amara sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment in Mapogu and looked at the pieces of fabric she'd pulled out for the evening. Her fingers were resting on the edge of a deep emerald silk she'd been saving for something. She'd cut the body of a gown from it 6 months ago and hadn't finished it, hadn't had the occasion. She thought about Seo-yeon's voice, how smooth it had been, how specifically helpful. She thought about the word embarrassed. She thought about the Song estate, the granite wall, the manicured winter garden, the entry corridor where Junseo had looked at her and asked his flat, precise questions. She thought about Madame Kang touching the beadwork and saying, "Oh," in that quiet voice. She pulled the emerald silk into her lap. She had 3 days. She could finish it. She reached for her scissors and her pincushion and the small lamp she used for close work, and she settled herself on the bed with the fabric spread around her like something she was already inside. And she began. She was wrong, though. She didn't finish the gown. Friday came and went in a blur of client adjustments and a crisis involving a beading shipment that arrived in the wrong color, and an argument with the supplier that Veronique was supposed to handle and didn't, which meant Amara handled it, which meant Amara was on the phone for an hour and a half, sorting out a problem that was not her problem and getting no credit for sorting it, which was the usual rhythm of things. She got home at 11 Friday night and looked at the unfinished emerald gown on the chair beside her bed and understood that she wasn't going to finish it in time. She stood there for a minute. Then she changed into her oldest work jeans, a fitted white blouse she'd tailored herself so it sat exactly right, and her good boots. She pressed the blouse carefully. She did her makeup with the same care she brought to fine work. Not heavy, just deliberate. She put on the gold studs from Chicago. She looked at herself in the mirror. Fine. She looked fine. She thought about calling Seo-yeon back and asking more questions. She decided not to. She went to bed. Saturday evening. The car Junseo had arranged was a black sedan, quiet and expensive, and it collected her at 6:30 from the street in front of her building. The driver was professional and silent, and she appreciated both qualities. The drive to Seongbuk-dong took 20 minutes. The sky was clear, and the city had gone purple dark around the edges, and the lights were coming on across the Han River, and she sat in the back of the car with her hands folded in her lap, and thought about nothing particularly, the way she sometimes did before situations she'd decided to walk into without a full plan. The estate gates were open when they arrived. Not the service gate this time. The main gate, wrought iron between stone pillars, flanked by small lights. The drive curved up through the garden, less bare-looking at night, the trees lit from below, something almost theatrical about it, and curved again toward the front of the house. There were cars parked along the drive, expensive cars, plural. Amara looked at them. She felt the first pull of something in her stomach.